Ranged combat is super important in Minecraft, and bows are by far the oldest and best way to do it, being an almost overpowered item, so learn it all in this bow guide. We're gonna start by going over some bow basics. The nice thing about bows is the fact that they are very easy to craft and can likely be obtained on your first or second day of playing Minecraft. All they really require is some sticks and some string, so with 3 string and 3 sticks you can make a bow. Now of course you can't actually use a bow without arrows. Arrows are crafted with flint, sticks, and feathers. Now with the bow, if you hold down right click or your use button, it'll charge the bow, then you can let go to make that arrow go flying. You can also not charge the bow up all the way and fire arrows really quickly. Let's move on though to what enchantments the bow actually has to offer for us. There are 6 enchantments that can be placed on the bow, meaning it can be difficult to get yourself a perfect bow. However, 2 of these are mutually exclusive, so the best bow will only have 5 enchantments on it. As with almost every other item in the game, of course unbreaking is something that bows can have on it. There's also a bow specific enchantment called power. Now power means that the arrows that you fire will have more damage on them. So for example, when hitting a mob with a power bow, you're generally going to have more damage be inflicted than if you used a standard bow. Now the difference works down to exactly being that if you have a power 5 bow, it'll give you 7.5 to 12.5 damage, with the average being 10 damage per shot, which is definitely very good. As well as that, we have punch. Now punch is basically knockback for a bow, is the best way of thinking about it. If you have a goat, for example, in Minecraft, you give it a bit of a taste of its own medicine with a punch bow. Then we have flame. Now flame is also very similar to another sword enchantment, and that enchantment is known as fire aspect. So for example, if we hit some of the mobs down here, you'll notice that they'll go on fire, and if we go down there to take a look at the drops that we're going to collect, any mob that would drop food when killed, if it's killed while on fire, it will drop cooked food. So for example, here with our flame bow, we can have pre-cooked steaks and also pre-cooked pork chop. So that's really useful, and if you're doing PvP, the additional fire damage that accumulates over time is also quite useful. But now finally we get down to the last 2 bow enchantments, and these are the ones that are mutually exclusive. That is Mending and Infinity. There is no other tool, weapon, or item in the entire game of Minecraft that has a mutually exclusive Mending enchantment. This is the only one. There's sort of a big controversy in Minecraft whether or not a Mending bow is better or an Infinity bow is better. I'll just work you through the differences of both. So the benefit to a Mending bow is of course an Infinity bow would technically not last forever, as there is no way to have a tool that has Infinity on it that's being regularly used to last forever. But the one nice thing about having the Infinity on the bow is that it gives you, well, infinity. The idea behind that is infinite arrows. Now it actually isn't of course infinite because the tool itself will not last infinitely, but it's as infinite as it can be considering the situation. Basically what that means is let's get ourselves a bow and let's put infinity on it. If we fire arrows with this Infinity bow, we have 50 arrows in our inventory, and as many arrows as we fire, that number is not going to go down at all. But you also cannot pick up the arrows, so you're not actually duplicating arrows, you're just sort of reusing the same one over and over. You only need 1 arrow to use an Infinity bow. So if we actually split our arrows like this, and we pick up just 1 arrow, and we fire with our Infinity bow, that 1 arrow is going to be able to keep firing forever. However, there is the issue that if we have no arrows in our inventory, then we're not going to be able to shoot with it at all. There are multiple types of arrows, and the only type of arrow that Infinity works on is the standard arrow. Spectral arrows and tipped arrows will not work with Infinity. And of course what Mending does is it makes it so that we can replenish the health of our bow if we gain any experience. So it's completely up to you which bow you pick, but those are exclusive. If you're enjoying this video, feel free to subscribe to see more Minecraft's guides, tips, tutorials, facts, and more. And be sure to turn on notifications so that you never miss my new uploads in the future. Anyway, that's all the bow enchantments broken down. Let's get on to how to actually use this bow effectively, so that we can take a proper look at the exact angles that arrows fly at. I've set a command block that's going to fill blocks in the position that this arrow moves. We're going to start by firing an arrow straight forward, also known as firing an arrow at 0 degrees, and let's watch what happens. Basically, the arrow will continue going in a straight line for a little while, while, then it'll gradually get lower and lower until eventually that process of it going downwards will get faster and faster to form sort of a circle, hits the ground, and then of course it's no more. And so because of this, it's basically going in a curve, but at the first start of that angle it is in a bit of a straight line, so if you're aiming at something that's close, you should aim at it straight on. Now let's try the same thing again, but let's aim one arrow at 30 degrees, and let's aim another arrow at 60 degrees. And let's compare the results. Now you can see that being traced out like that. Let's start at the arrow that went 30 degrees. This angle is much different from this angle over here. You can notice that this angle is actually starting off much straighter, and you can see here that we have the arrow go quite far, but then at a certain point it drops off even quicker. The idea is here is that when we're firing the arrow at 30 degrees, we're making the arrow go further in a straight line, but its total distance moved is actually going to be less. Now at 60 degrees, we're putting more of the arrow's energy into its upwards motion. You can notice that there, it's still going in a somewhat straight line, but it reaches the crest of its height much sooner than the other arrow does, but it also reaches a much higher height. And so basically we can go higher but not farther, or we can go farther but not higher. There's always a trade-off. And the reason for this strange motion is because of Minecraft simulating gravity. So for an example right here, what if we fire an arrow at 45 degrees, which is kind of the exact difference between all of these? Well, let's try lining this up at exactly 45 degrees and firing an arrow, seeing what happens. Now ideally an arrow at 45 degrees is going to be the perfect balance between forwards and upwards motion, but again, let's say we want to fire really far, we want to go and hit that pillager outpost. If we fire at it directly, because arrows do eventually form into a curve, that's not actually going to hit the pillager outpost, it's going to be nowhere near hitting it. However, if we start with some upwards motion, like let's say firing around here, that's going to be much closer to hitting the pillager outpost. But you can see if we take a look at the arrows that landed, there's two arrows here, and one of them did end up hitting the pillager outpost. And so it's the same idea, and it's actually crazy looking at these graphed lines of these arrows, how incredibly far arrows do travel. So the lesson of all of this is basically you want to fire higher up than you're actually hitting for. As of course, even like let's say trying to hit these pigs, we're pretty close to them, so it'll probably work to hit them straight forward like this, it does. However, if we're trying to hit something that's further away, like that pig up there, if we fire directly for the pig, we're not going to hit it. But if we're going to fire a little bit higher up than the pig, like let's say we'll get a little further away from these, again, firing at it directly, it's not going to hit it, but if we fire a little bit above the pig, it is going to hit it, and the reason why is that that arrow is going to go downwards because of gravity affecting it. We can't change that, it's not going to go in a straight line or anything, and so because of that, you can see a perfect arrow pathway from where we were, going all the way over to hitting that unsuspecting pig. And that's kind of the basics of how you want to aim bows in Minecraft, is to sort of have the rough idea of these mathematical parabolas in mind when trying to fire. As you can see, they do affect so much the way the arrow moves. There's some other important things you need to know when firing the arrow though, and that is the charging of the arrow. So if we hold down right click for a long time and then fire the arrow, that is fully charged. But if we fire an arrow without charging it very much at all, the damage is going to be much different. If we just go like this, almost no damage at all. So how exactly does this work? Well, if you charge an arrow for 0.1 seconds, which basically means the minimum you can, it's going to cause literally 1/2 heart of damage. However, if you charge the bow for any time between 0.1 seconds and 1 second, so anything between this and this, that's going to hurt the mob at 2.5 hearts of damage, which is definitely decent, but nothing crazy. However, to inflict the ultimate amount of damage, and of course all these things are proportionally affected by power, you want to charge the bow for over 1 second, and you can see that on the actual view of the bow there, when it's fully charged and it starts to shake. When you let go from that damage, it will have a damage anywhere between 3 to 5.5 hearts, with an average of 4.5. If you have power 5, a fully charged bow will give you an average of 7.5 to 12.5 hearts of damage. But let's take a minute to discuss something really important regarding bows, and that's the villager that's all about them. Almost every single trade that the Fletcher villager has is optimized to making using bows and arrows easier. For example, the trade of 1 emerald for 16 arrows. That's insane if you think about it. 16 arrows for only 1 emerald. Really a great trade. The Fletcher is also the villager that will turn gravel into flint for you, or will turn sticks into emeralds. Now you can also buy bows from the Fletcher if you want. This video is about prioritizing the bow, which you can actually buy as well from the Fletcher in an enchanted form. These enchantments enchantments are going to be fairly so-so. For example, here this is only power 2, so nothing crazy. But if you trade with the Fletcher enough, you can also unlock the trade of getting enchanted crossbows. And finally we have the trade where you can get tipped arrows from Fletchers. I'm going to discuss how to get tipped arrows normally in just a minute here, but with this trade we can turn arrows into tipped arrows in a much easier method than it would normally be inside the game. And so be sure to be aware of that, as you can get yourself all kinds of status effects with tipped arrows. Like for instance here we have speed, and we didn't even have to do any brewing or any other processes for that. Oh, and if you are wondering how to make a Fletcher villager, they become that way from the fletching table. Fletching tables are crafted just like a crafting table, but there are 2 flint on top of it in the recipe. And although the fletching table currently has no interactive use to it, it is the table that gives villagers that fletching profession. But now on to a really important topic, arrows. They're definitely half of bow and arrows, and here is some very important information about all the different arrow types. Now there are 3 types of arrows inside of Minecraft. There are standard arrows, there are spectral arrows, which are only in Java Edition, and there are tipped arrows. There are a ton of different tipped arrows, so there's technically a lot more than 3 types of arrows, but of course there's 3 main types. Now here's how you make every type. As I did discuss earlier, standard arrows are made with flint, sticks, and feathers. 3 of those will give you 4 arrows. Now once you have standard arrows, you can then turn these into one of the other 2 types. If you want to turn standard arrows into spectral arrows, you need 1 arrow and 4 glowstone dust. That will give you 2 spectral arrows, which funny enough is technically duplicating your arrows. As for example right here, we're going to turn 16 arrows into 32 spectral arrows. Now another thing you can do is you can craft tipped arrows. If you want to do this, you need 8 standard arrows and a lingering potion of any type you want, and you'll notice that it'll actually convert those arrows into being tipped arrows. The interesting fact about this is that it's done differently in Java versus Bedrock. Also, if you're wondering how to make tipped arrows in Bedrock, you simply right-click a potion into a cauldron, and then right-click arrows on that cauldron, and it'll convert those arrows into a tipped arrow, which is nice because to make tipped arrows in Java, of course, we need the lingering potion, which is made with dragon's breath, versus in Bedrock you don't need dragon's breath for that, which makes these colorful arrows be much easier to get in Bedrock. Now these arrows all have unique properties to them, and I'll explain it simply. Standard arrows are of course just the normal arrows that work with no specific variations to them, although something interesting you may notice is that if you have a fully charged arrow shot, there are these particles behind it, but if your arrow shot is not fully charged, there will not be those particles behind it. Now what do spectral arrows do? Well, they basically put the spectral effect over whatever they hit, and not for very long, about 10 seconds, but you can see here there is this outline around me, and I'll show you the way that this is really useful, as of course you'd be wondering what's even the point of that. Well, basically the way it works is, let's hit one of these turtles for example with the spectral effect. We can still see that outline even behind the tree here. In fact, it's pretty crazy that way because you literally have a form of X-ray vision. This is super useful because obviously with something like a turtle it's not that useful, but if you're fighting a wither or a different player or something where you need to really know where they are at all times, utilizing the spectral arrows for that cannot be more important. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, these are not in Bedrock Edition at all. Also, another really great thing you can do in Java Edition is get spectral arrows from piglin trading as a fairly common chance. Now what do the tipped arrows do? They basically just provide the potion effect to whatever mob you hit with it. So for example, if we hit a mob with this arrow of poison, that mob will of course have arrow damage, but it'll also start getting poison damage for the duration listed on the arrow. Here it says 11 seconds. Obviously I would not suggest using poison arrows on cows necessarily, but this can actually be quite useful if you have aggressive mobs after you. There's even some fun situations you can use spectral arrows, like let's say the slow falling effect, where for example if there's a mob that's falling and is going to die of fall damage, maybe even a player, and you hit them with an arrow of slow falling, they would then from that point on not die because they would have that effect. But that's basically everything you need to know about arrows. Now for some really interesting tricks that you can do with bows in Minecraft. The first one is the fact that flame arrows can activate a bunch of different things, including TNT. And this leads to a really fun thing you can do, which I call TNT drop stacking. Basically what it is, you put a bunch of TNT in a line, and you shoot an arrow at that TNT that has the flame effect. The TNT will basically go one by one activating because of that flame arrow, making a really fun visual effect with that TNT. And it's also a good idea if you are activating TNT to use a flame arrow on it, because of course that's much safer than potentially getting exploded by it. Another really interesting bow related item is the target block. the target block will have a redstone signal outputted from it, proportional to how close to the center you hit. So if you hit in the exact center of the target block, you're going to get a full signal, whereas if you hit on the very edge, you're going to get an incredibly weak signal. This item is crafted with redstone and hay, and is a really useful item for improving your bow aiming skills. By having one of these at a decent distance and trying to hit the bullseye with your arrow, you can even set it up with redstone where it'll tell you exactly how close to the center you hit, which can be really perfect for bow aiming practice. Now, speaking of things that arrows can activate, they can also activate tripwires, and they can activate buttons, even pressure plates. So be aware of this. If you want to activate any of these things remotely or from a distance, you can do so with the arrow. Another really cool trick you can do with arrows is fire them through lava. This will basically make the arrows turn from standard arrows into flame arrows. As you can see right here, this is a normal bow, and if we fire arrows through this lava, they will then turn into flame arrows. Now, you can even use this to light TNT if you want. So for example, we'll put a piece of TNT right there, and we will fire arrows through the lava at that TNT, and it will successfully ignite that TNT because these are flame arrows that we're firing and having thrown at the TNT. So maybe use this next time you're firing arrows, or if you want to make flame arrow dispensers, simply have those arrow dispensers be behind lava. Now, arrows are a very complicated item, so we're going to move on from arrow tricks to arrow facts you maybe didn't know. What's really interesting is that Endermen cannot be hit by arrows, and they're not even mad if you try, as long as you don't look them in the eyes. All it does is it performs a forced teleport on the Enderman. It just makes it so the Endermans are forced to teleport away. This is actually really good if Endermen are bothering you, by simply hitting them with an arrow and not looking at them in the face. And the crazy thing is that even if an Enderman can't teleport away, it still will not be hit by the arrow. In fact, it's exact same if a player is in creative mode. So I am now in creative mode, as you can see, and if I get hit by an arrow, what happens? Those arrows will literally just suspend on top of my head. And obviously if we crouch or move away, you can see the arrows do go off of the top of my head, but it's really kind of fun to see those arrows be suspended there, if not a bit glitchy. Obviously if we hit an iron golem directly with an arrow, it would get mad at us. But like for instance right here, what if we make a little platform above the iron golem, and we fill that platform full of arrows? We're not hitting the iron golem specifically, and we have no ill intention towards it, but there are arrows that are suspended above it. And then if we break the blocks right here, that iron golem is going to get hit by those arrows, and it's going to assume that we were the one that did it. You can tell that it's angry right there. In fact, if we let it out, it will kill us instantly. And so obviously the problem there, and the thing that you have to be aware of, is that if players have access to an arrow that you fired, they can make whatever they want be attributed to you. So for example, maybe having a dog be hit by you, or an iron golem, or even just any other mob. This can also mean that it can make it look like you killed a certain player when you did not actually kill them. And the funny thing about arrows too is that if you're actually hit by an arrow, they will be stuck in your player model for a little bit. The speed that arrows travel is on top of the speed of the player. So let's say we're traveling 10 blocks a second and the arrow would be traveling 10 blocks a second. When we fire the arrow, it would then go 20 blocks a second. What this means is you can still fire arrows when you're flying with Elytra, and you can notice that those arrows still go in front of us. Even though we're actually going faster than an arrow would normally travel, we can still fire these arrows and they're going to go in front of us and not sort of glitch behind us and disappear. This is really useful if you're flying around, although it's very difficult to hit mobs when you are flying around. It does make it possible because of the fact that Minecraft realistically calculates that. And the last thing is, if you're in a PvP scenario and you successfully hit another player with an arrow, an interesting ding sound will play, which is basically there to alert a player of whether or not they successfully were able to hit another player with an arrow. Anyway, that is everything about bows and arrows in Minecraft. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to see more content like this, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye!